Today's feast is that of St. John Chrysostom, and Chrysostom, that was the name, he was nicknamed that. It means golden-mouthed in Greek. His father was a high-ranking officer in the Syrian army, and now he soon died after the birth of John, and so leaving behind his wife, who was only 20 years old, and one elder daughter, and finally St. John. And St. John's mother, she chose to remain a widow, and she raised him very piously in the faith. He was sent to school, and he excelled in the arts, especially in oratory, and that was his greatest talent. And he was privileged to study under the greatest orator of the age. He started a career as a lawyer, and he was very successful. But one day he met a certain bishop. His name was Meletius, and having a conversation with this bishop, he started to think more about the faith, to think more deeply about God. And so he would listen to the sermons of this holy bishop very often, and soon enough he found himself studying less the profane writers and studying Scripture. 3 years later, he would be ordained a lector. That is, he gave his life to the service of the church. And the lector, that is one of the minor orders, and his job was to read or chant the lessons in the Mass and in the Divine Liturgy. And a few years later, he was ordained a priest. And for 12 years, he served as a priest, and his main job was to preach. His talent of oratory was being used in the highest way. And suddenly, the Bishop of Constantinople died, and John was chosen to succeed him. This city was one of the greatest and wealthiest of those times, and so his work was cut out for him. He at once began to correct the abuses of his own clergy and of the religious, and then also the laity. And he preached against different vices that were prominent. And he had no respect for persons, and so he criticized what he called the unreasonable extravagance of rich apparel, particularly in the noble women. It became ridiculous, and so he spoke against this abuse, and the reason he did this mainly was that these noble women, they were part of the courts of the emperor. They were Catholics, and so all the people, they did look to them as an example. So he saw it very important that those people, those noble women, and those in the court, that they set a good example. So he said some words against their practices, and they began to hate him. And the empress herself, Eudoxia, she had defrauded some widow of property. And this was, of course, a terrible injustice, and St. John was not silent. He spoke out against it, and so he was exiled. Now, after his first exile, he was brought back because all the people loved him so much that a riot was feared unless they brought him back. And again, he continued in his course of action. He preached against the different vices. Now, the empress, she still hated him, and she was just seeking for a way to finally get revenge on him. And that opportunity would come again when all the bishops even, or many of the bishops, they also began to dislike St. John because, well, they didn't want to reform their own lives. So with them united on the side of the empress, it was easy for her to wreak a revenge on him. And so he was again sent into exile. Now, the last sermon he gave in his church, in the basilica, is actually recorded, his farewell, as it were. He said, "Many are the waves, and threatening are the storms, which surround me, but I fear them not, for I am standing on the rock. Let the sea rage, it cannot wash away this rock. And tell me, what would you have me fear?" Speaking to his people. "Death? To me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Quoting St. Paul here, and St. John was renowned, he is most famous for his devotion to St. Paul, his epistles. Continuing, he says, "I fear neither death nor wish to live, save for your advantage." Speaking to his people. "Your interest alone induces me to speak of these things and to ask of you, by the love you bear me, take courage. For no one can separate us. No human power can part what God has united. Be not troubled at what has happened to me." His exile he was about to enter upon seemed, politically speaking, as a defeat for the church, because again he was combating vice, and all of those in power, the politicians, well, they got it their way. He was going to be sent out of the country. He could no longer exercise his influence, or so it seemed. He says, "Be not troubled at what has happened. Be firm in your faith. Have you not observed that when Peter was walking on the waters and began to fear, he was in danger of sinking, not because the sea was rough, but because his faith was weak? Have I been raised to this dignity by human powers? Was it man that brought me to it? Can man now depose me? I have," he says, "this one pledge, and on that I trust, not on my own strength. I have God's written promise. This is my staff and my guarantee, my tranquil port." And what is his word? "That I am with you all days, even to the consummation of the world." "Had not my love for you kept me here," he continues, speaking to his people, "I would have started this very day on my exile. For this is my constant prayer. O Lord, thy will be done. I will do thy will, not what such or such an one may will, but what thou willest. This is my tower of strength. This is my firm rock. This is my trusty staff. If God will that I should go, I will go. If he will me to remain here, I will give him thanks. Whithersoever he wills me to go, I will bless his holy name." Great resignation we see here on the part of St. John in the midst of such political strife. And again, the people were being deprived of their pastor. It seemed that they were to be left to the ravenous wolves. But for St. John, one thought dominated. There is a God. We have to recall that from time to time. There is a God who's in charge, and he is here. He's even right here in the Blessed Sacrament. Remember this, dear faithful, in your daily lives, and remember the words and the promises of this God. Read his gospel, read the epistles of the sacred scripture. They are filled with words of consolation and of hope. And finally, fear nothing. There is only one thing St. John tells us. This is what he lives by. There is only one thing we should fear, that is sin. There's only one thing we should regret, and that is sin.